Sweet.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction. As you know, my name is Deirdre Karen. I started Agora Insights nearly 7 years ago now, and the goal was really to empower business analysts and business architects. We work across the globe, and so my job is to help business analysts and business architects achieve their learning goals. And there's so much exciting stuff happening in this field at the moment. I'm certainly an absolute geek, and I have worked in multiple projects. I know the problems with requirements. I know the problems with systems not integrating, and then we're repeating projects over and over again. And so I'm here to tell you there's some hope. The future is looking very bright for business analysts. And so we're going to go through a little bit today. So I have to create some context with AI. I've been actively testing and using AI for business architecture and business analysis now for probably 7 or 8 months. It has grown rapidly. And just to put it in context, for those who are around in 93, when I think the internet kind of first started showing, and it became like a bit of a thing. Well, it was on the news, but it wasn't big, to today. So we're talking 30 years. So the 30 years of progressing to being web-based and really using the internet, in comparison to AI is growing at a pace of 7 times Moore's law, which means its growth will be where the what's taking 30 years for the internet will take 4.3 years. That's it's crazy. So I just want to say to all business analysts, now's the time to actually go in, look at it, embrace it. It's not going to disappear. It's happening really, really quickly. You need to be on top of it. So I'm going to talk about business architecture too, and this is actually a really important concept when we talk about requirements and AI. I'll explain why. And I know we all want to get to the hearty chunk of requirements and AI, and we will, but there's a process. So the role of the business analyst and the business architect, what do business analysts do? This is just a high-level overview versus what do business architects do. And then the effectiveness of AI for requirements. And this is because the two roles are essentially is what's going to make your requirements work. And so whether you play both roles, whether you play a part of the role or so forth, remember AI is a language and it requires structure. And so we need to have that. Now, last year, I saw this on one of the LinkedIn posts where they had a definition of a business analyst for BA Day, which is the 1st of November. So a business analyst is someone who does precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those with questionable knowledge. And I thought it was hilarious. And then Daniel Lambert is quite big in the business architecture community. And his comment, I thought was priceless. Sounds less accurate if a decent business architecture practice is in place to assist business analysts with their description of requirements, epics, and user stories. So today I'm going to show you how to do that using business architecture and business analysis. Don't worry. All right, so what do business analysts do? Essentially, we investigate. I like to use the term we're investigative journalists, right? So if you're doing business analysis properly, it means you're analyzing, you're looking at things that need to change, you're wanting to deep dive into particular areas, you want to ensure that you understand what people need, what the business needs, what the customers need, what systems requirements there are, etc. And you typically work in a very, I don't want to use the term silo, that's the wrong term to use. You typically work in a very defined area, because in projects, we're not trying to solve every problem in an organization. We're trying to solve specific problems. So really a BA, if you are getting into the grits of analyzing, you're analyzing to depth. Whereas business architects look across the environment. So business architecture is looking to understand the breadth. So how many projects are we working on? How deep do we go within these projects? How would they all be constructed? Are we doing the same thing in different areas? That's the kind of thing we'd look at. I often talk about a house. When you are designing your house, we often look to having good architecture, and architecture is around the structure, how things flow, how things work, how things come together. In reality, in our business, now all businesses have architecture, believe it or not, but not all businesses architect their business. There's a big difference. In reality, this is often what our businesses look like. And we are trying to navigate through project after project. We're trying to figure out piece by piece, what's happening, and it gets too hard. So we work in a particular environment, and you might say, oh, we want to update a CRM system, or we want to update a particular area, and then it becomes so hard, we go, we'll just fix this piece. And then we'll run another project that's similar next year. This is typically what happens. Now, maybe your organization is different, but based on my experience, it's pretty much the same around the world. So with architecture, and this is going to lead to AI, we are going to need to filter. We're going to need to simplify what the key components of the business are, and we're going to have to create viewpoints. So those who've studied BABA will know that we talk about views and viewpoints. Viewpoints will show us overarching what our business looks like, not trying to give all of everything, but providing a structure. So as I mentioned, business architects cover the breadth of the organization, and business analysts cover the depth of a particular situation. And so the analogy I like to use is your architecture has a knowledge base. It's kind of like a library covering all of the components of your organization, whereas your business analyst uses the knowledge base and creates what I term a knowledge brief, which is to analyze specific types of information about your organization. Are there any questions now? I hope I haven't confused anybody with these analogies. But if you have a question, please just, I don't always check the chat, but just put your hands up. I think that will be helpful. All right, so let me just quickly widen my screen. I think that's going to help. Oh, there we go.
We can also keep an eye on the chat for you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd appreciate that.
Jump in if somebody has something.
Yeah. Okay, so what's very important to understand when we think of AI? AI needs to understand the breadth of what we do in an organization and a specific project in order to give us the requirements. Now, the reason why this matters is because if you've got multiple projects doing the same things, often we waste time, we waste money, we waste resources, our requirements aren't standardized, they're untraceable, etc. And so we have to understand how these two fit together. So let's quickly talk about the role of a business architect and how the architect structures specific things, and then let's talk about the role of how the business analyst would, or the AI would work. So at a macro level, a business architect establishes principles and governing policies for the organization, and often interacts with suppliers, partners, and types of outsourcing. At a strategic level, let's say we want to do digital transformation. A business architect would supplement the vision with target capabilities, supporting principles and policies, and a current state environment assessment to provide contextual rationale. Why do we want to, do this digital transformation? At a program level, strategic initiatives into delivery-focused change initiatives. So now you can start to see where the BA is coming in. So we've taken this big picture view and we've started going, okay, actually, this is the area we want to target. And it could be a broad area, it could be. So we talk about programs because there might be multiple projects involved in that. And it depends on the methodology that you use. If you use something like SAFE, then they do structure it in those different layers. And then at your lowest level, this is where your architecture would be managed by your business analyst. And when we talk about low level, I'm talking about depth. I'm not talking about importance. So this is where you would deep dive into specific things, like the analyst would look to ensure that there's alignment between the project, the architecture, and the information that we're trying to provide the organization. So what both of you are doing, when I say both of you, I'm talking about the business analyst and the business architect, is you are gathering information, either the detailed information that you need for a project or the broad information that you need for your business and your design, your knowledge base, and you are converting this data into information, into knowledge, so that the business can use it to make decisions, quite simply. So what is the role of AI in all of this? So we got to consider the two roles, whether you play them together or individually, or just one of the roles. Everything about AI is language, right? So when we write requirements using words. When we design business architecture, we design using visualizations and terms and concepts and words. And AI is basically the same, right? Just language. So, but for an AI to give you really good requirements, it needs to understand context. So when I speak about the breadth, it needs to understand, what organization is this for? Why does this organization need a specific thing? What are the options for this organization in terms of what is its vision, its customer segment, etc. Now, of course, you can go into ChatGPT and be like, write requirements for blah. And you will get a nice set of, even with ChatGPT 3, you'll get a nice set of requirements. But again, is that something that your business actually needs? So you have to provide it with context. And this is where we often bring in architecture, because we want to explain what the context of the organization is so that you get in good requirements. AI actually needs to understand its role. How many of you actually create roles for AI? Don't know if you... Okay. So if you don't tell AI what it should be, it will become what it wants to be. And it can be quite bad sometimes. If you're not specifying the role and the character, I call it, it's almost like a digital twin of your role. If you don't specify what the role is, then it might assume it's a sales manager. Oftentimes it does, because it's very marketing focused. So those are things to consider. it needs to understand the principles of business architecture and business analysis, but we're going to start with architecture. It needs to understand structured outputs. What do you want to get from it? Now, for those of you ChatGPT, you might say, give me a document or write 10 user stories or whatever you might, but you still have to explain how you want to see that. The output has to be clear to AI. I know a lot of us can read each other's minds, but AI definitely cannot. It has to read words and it has to understand what you're trying to do. It needs to create containers for requirements. So I'll explain that as we go through it. I'm going to give you an example first, and it needs to have good impact. It needs good inputs to frame the architecture. So you have to think of AI as bringing somebody into an organization and educating it with the right information so that it understands why it's there, and it understands what it's trying to achieve in that particular space. So now I'm going to give you an example of a custom bot that we've built. Try again. I'm going to take architecture. You don't need to know any of this, but I'm taking our knowledge base, just our architecture knowledge base, high level, which consists of capabilities and stakeholders and business units. And I'm going to create requirements from it. And we've given it an example. So I've given it the knowledge base. Remember, I spoke about the knowledge brief and the knowledge base. We are uploading a knowledge base to this. And we have trained it to be a business architect that delivers requirements. So we've actually had to train it. Oops, I keep pushing the wrong button. I apologize. Okay, so as you can see, there's a document that I've added, and it has now outputted. Remember, I mentioned I've been talking about a requirements container. Now, you've got to think of what we call capability in the organization. I won't have time to teach capabilities, so I'm hoping that you understand capabilities. But when we have a capability in our organization, we want to have a map to the types of requirements that there might be for that particular individual capability. So that capability, we want to have what we call a requirements concept. And a requirements concept means that it is all the things that would be related to that capability of the organization. And so I've asked AI to create a requirements concept, a container for one capability. And the capability we're discussing is brand management. So you can imagine the case study that I'm using is a coffee shop that is wanting to franchise globally. And so I've said, look at brand in our knowledge base, brand management, and I want you to create a set of requirements containers. Now, I've trained AI to do this, and there it does. It talks about the business objects, it talks about the information concepts, it talks about the business units that would be required and the stakeholders that would be involved. Then I said, great, now create user stories. I want you to notice a couple of things here. So number one, it's given us a traceability index, which is really important because remember, we shouldn't repeat requirements across our business. So it has now created specific requirements for the context in which we've built it. So now it's doing what I call the knowledge brief. We're taking a requirements container based on the capabilities, and it's giving us the information that we require. So, I'm so sorry. I keep pushing the wrong button. So here we have the user stories, and it's created 20 user stories. Now we can say, provide us with acceptance criteria. Because remember, AI now has the broad picture of this organization. It's looking at the whole picture of the business. AI is really smart. It can look at a lot of data and make sense of it. And remember, I'm giving it organization information. I'm not asking it to search my organization. I'm structuring the information accordingly. So now, watch this. Acceptance criteria for the first user story. One user story, multiple acceptance criteria. So brand guidelines, what those guidelines would be. And then we say, okay, great. Now, based on the guidelines, create functional requirements. So we've got our traceability, and there it's created functional requirements. You'll see it even highlights that there, what the acceptance criteria would be for that functional requirement. And I want to point out that this is in 8 minutes to end this little video. And then we have non-functional requirements. And this is for one user story. And then I asked it to redo, because it was too systems focused, the non-functional requirements, which it has done. But it hasn't included the traceability. So if I wasn't so lazy, I would have asked it to include the traceability. And then I asked for transitional requirements, again, of one user story, which it has done. So then I asked it to create additional user stories, just because I thought, how many can I create? And you can create hundreds. So one capability to a requirements concept, you can create hundreds of user stories, and you can use them over and over again in a project. Because remember, when we have business architecture, a user story can be used in project A, project B, project C. And the nice thing with that is that we can immediately see how many times is a user story being used, and should it be used that many times? Because it's now bringing the full architecture together. So we have another 20 user stories based on our single architecture knowledge base. And I didn't make it extensive or exhaustive. Now, what are we going to do with these user stories and these requirements? Now, typically, this is when you should start a project, not necessarily do this during a project. We should start to understand the strategy and more or less how long some things would take. So in business architecture, we have something called a value stream, which is similar to a process, but it's not a process. But we now say, okay, taking the requirements concepts and taking the user stories, create a value stream for us. And this will help us eventually do some solution requirements. But also help us with our solution. So here it says we have to deliver consistent brand experience. This is our project that we're now going to be doing. These are our stakeholders that are involved. These are the stages of the project. These are the values, the value being delivered for this particular project. And these are the supporting capabilities. And you'll see there's more than just one capability in the organization. And going a little bit further now, I've asked it to cross-map this with the user stories. So this is what we want to do in our project. This is the process. Now cross-map all of this with the user stories. Now, I could have done this several times, and I advise everyone to do it because it'll show the projects and what user stories should be used and when. So here it's given us the traceability. So at this stage, what user stories of our delivery to our stakeholders would we need to, just going to pause it for a minute so I can catch up. So we'd have the stage of the delivery that we want to deliver to, and we'd have the user story that would be appropriate to that stage. And remember, I've even gone further into solution requirements in terms of functional and non-functional. And then, so I thought that was really great. It's given, but some things to notice, there might be some user stories missing. We might have to go and look at our knowledge base again and say, what other user stories should we add? And where do we store them? And how do we use them in other projects and so forth? Now I want to know, how long will it take to implement this particular project? So we want to, update our brand because Coffee Supreme wants to look at franchising. So I've said you have to consider the number of stakeholders that would be involved in, updating the brand of the organization. I've given it that instruction. And it's now given a breakdown of how long the project might take, depending on the key stakeholders involved, which I thought was really great because it gives those different options to be able to explore in the organization how long things might take, depending on the number of affected groups. So I chose to go with the 10 affected stakeholders. And when we talk about stakeholders, just like we do in Babok, we talk about them as a concept, not as the number of people, but we'd say users, let's say end users would be a stakeholder. You might want to split it out a little bit further than that, but that's typically how we look at it. So here I've said consider only the 10 stakeholders and what tasks would need to be performed in order to deliver to this project. So it was really good. It listed the tasks. So the marketing team would have to do this, the executive team, the franchise owners would have to design team, training team, sales team, and customer service team. So as you can see, we're looking at stakeholders. We're not looking at particular job titles. And it's given a rough estimate of how long that would take to work with people. Now, this is where I say analysts need to analyze. This is where you really provide value to the organization. You look at this information, you go, hang on, that's not quite how it works in our business. And then you would retrain your bot so that it understands, or actually in our organization, we don't work in that particular way. We might have different structures that we work with. And obviously uploading that information back to the bot is really helpful. So in this case, I've now asked it to phase it into an initiative. So I said, provide an initiative roadmap for changing our brand. And it has now broken that down into different phases. It's also looked at the goals, the stakeholders, and how they are performing. And at this point, I thought, great, it's been 8 minutes. I'll draw a line there because we've got a webinar that we're running. So briefly, that is a very, very quick way to get quality requirements because we use in a knowledge base, and then we specify specific areas of that knowledge base that we want to explore and investigate. And if you build your bot properly, you can actually get a really good set of requirements because it understands rules. Yeah, hands up. Neil.
Marty had a question.
Yeah.
My question was, where or how does AI get the data to generate all the stories, the acceptance criteria, and the estimates for implementation?
So
And you talked about a knowledge base earlier, but
let me show you.
Who's feeding that knowledge base?
So when you do architecture, this is what I've fed it. Actually, I fed it less than this. But here are a set of capabilities. So we have basically 10 spreadsheets where the majority of this information is around the capabilities we have. I only fed it 3 of these. This goes down to about 250 capabilities. Capabilities are what we do as an organization, high level, conceptual. I fed it business units. So these are the business units that we're working with. And I fed it, I didn't even do information concepts, stakeholder, a list of stakeholders that would be involved. And I made it exhaustive. I thought of every possible scenario for Supreme Coffee. The other thing that I did share very, very first was vision, mission, unique proposition, customer segments, and philosophy, so that it understood what type of business I was working with. So this is the broad context. As you can see, it was a really simple set. That's what it got fed, and that's what it came up with. So
Well, I'm still lost with this because those spreadsheets that you have, that to me would seem like it would take a boatload of time to come up with. And you're saying AI can spit out all our requirements to do everything in 8 minutes? I'm not getting the connection there.
Okay, let's remove the 8 minutes. It was just an example of how quickly AI could work. The knowledge base that I built here took me approximately maybe 2 weeks, and I used AI to help me with it. The knowledge base is not about every component of the organization. It's about the capabilities, the stakeholders, the business units that are involved. So it's about the organization. And I spend time going through the various aspects of that organization. With AI, you can take information that you have in your organization, you can take your business architecture, and it can reason all of this from your information that you feed it. It can sense make it, if that makes sense. Does that make it clearer, Marty? I don't know if it does.
Well, the organization I'm in, I think we have a really poor habit of documenting things. And what you're showing here is a tremendous library of documentation that AI can pull from.
Yeah.
Without that documentation, does AI work?
It does, because it already has knowledge, but it's not contextual. So,
I drive this back to autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles, the car has 3 basic functions for it to work. braking, accelerating, and steering. But the possibilities of a autonomous vehicle across the country are infinite.
Mhm.
You have to take in consideration the weather, the lighting of any particular road at any particular time. I'm sorry, I'm just not getting where the data and the knowledge are coming from. I'm sorry, I'm
Marty,
missing that.
I think the data and stuff comes from all the stuff that AI has harvested from people who've put in their questions and all of their information. But what Deidre is trying to do is she's actually refining that information that already exists on the internet that's been harvested and trying to navigate it into her context for her company. Is that a correct statement, or am I summarizing properly?
Yeah. Yeah. AI is a tool that can reason lots of things. And you're absolutely right, Marcy. You
Okay,
have to
I guess that's where I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I thought it was AI was just going to grab stuff from our organization, but it's grabbing it from the entire internet.
Everywhere. That's why there's so many lawsuits right now from like authors and stuff, because they feel their stuff is being stolen without copyright and whatnot. So that's the downside of the AI from what I've read. So
Thank you,
that's
Marcy.
my question that you'll see in the chat later.
You can contain it. So if you're using, for instance, ChatGTP on the internet and you load information on, then you're contributing to their infinite database, right? If you want to work like we've ended up doing to create a gated AI, anything we upload doesn't go feed itself back, right? It's gated, but it knows how to operate using the data that we have, the data it has, to perform the function. So you can protect yourself in that way, because that's one of the biggest things. You don't want to have, AI doing whatever it wants to do and sharing it with the world. That's not where you want to go with it. So you do definitely have gated options, depending on the tool that you use. Like, for instance, you can use Azure AI, and you can have gated, you can upload your business context in there, which won't be shared across the universe, but it will be kept within your Azure platform. And that would then create that context that you require for your organization. And remember, you don't need to provide a lot. So one of the things, and let me just move this out for now. One of the things with business architecture, when we create all the kind of conceptual data that we need, we are not trying to create this nasty picture I showed you in the beginning. We're not trying to create, this one. We actually just want to almost catalog the organization. We want to create an overview of what that organization looks like, because that is essentially what you're providing AI with. And so as architects, if you're working in architecture, we look at providing context for the capabilities. We look at the value streams. We look at any strategies that the organization might have. The information concepts, again, information concepts is just kind of, what is this? So how would you define certain things in your organization? Because it's a language model, we'd look at our organizational business units, so our groups, our stakeholders, our products, our initiatives, and our policies. And we won't be exhaustive. This is really important with AI. You don't have to have all the information. It's smart enough to deduce information. What it will do is find the information faster than a human trying to mull through everything that the business has. So you want to create structure, and that's what we do with the architecture perspective. I really hope this makes more sense now, Marty.
I'm getting it. Thank you.
Okay. It's super exciting. I mean, AI really is going to be a game changer, is a game changer. So what we do when we do requirements. So for those who've seen the requirements classification schema from your BABOK. You'll know that you have business requirements, you have stakeholder requirements, and you have solution requirements. So what you need to be able to do is give it the business context, as in the capabilities of the organization. You need to give it the business units as well as the stakeholders involved in the organization. And then you have to create the context. So we often talk about BACM in your BABOK guide, which is you have to understand who's involved. So you have to understand, the needs, the solution, etc. And that will help us create the requirement solutions. And so what AI is really good at is doing this bit, which is your solution requirements, if you can frame it correctly. So it will give you anything that you want today, but if you frame it correctly, you'll get quality information from your AI. So this is just your meta model of saying, this is what you would need from your business architecture. Oops. And that will help us build the requirements for the initiative and the solutions. Now, what can or cannot AI do? So AI has difficulty understanding complexity and nuances of hierarchical data-like capabilities. So you have to be very careful around how you can give it all the data, but you've got to be very careful around your instructions. So you can't just go, do this and expect it to truly understand, what's in your head. You have to be very specific around how you're structuring your data. And so when we talk about business capabilities, like I said, it's almost like a catalog in the library. It's like, you're going to go to a fiction area or a non-fiction area. Marty, did you have another question?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No, sorry. I just saw your sound was on. So AI is not really good at reading your mind. And also, if you provide it with too much information, I don't mean the upload. I mean, in the instruction, like you write it as a long sentence, like you're having a conversation over coffee with somebody. If you write like that, AI struggles to interpret that correctly. Building the table incrementally. So when we look at requirements, as I showed you, you have to do piece by piece. So I have to take one component, break it down to the next component. So we took a capability. We then said what requirement concepts would be related to this capability. We then said, what are our user stories based on that? We then took one user story and we did the solution requirements and the acceptance criteria from that. So as you can see, you have to give it instructions in piecemeal, even though it's super fast. The minute you start giving it a broad set, you get diluted data, and it's not really good stuff that comes out of it. So rather break it down, functional decomposition down to its next level, and you'll get the information quite quickly, but you're going to get a higher quality set of information. The AI repeated certain mistakes even after corrections, indicating a lack of learning within a session. You have to reprimand the bot. It's really quite funny. So you have to compliment it and reprimand it if it does something wrong. So again, with AI, because it's a language model, it must know that, and I'm not talking swear words, although it's tempting when it makes mistakes. You have to let it know that you're dissatisfied with the output. And so you have to be on it. And this is why I say AI is like a twin, it's a partner with you, but it cannot replicate your role. So good news, BAs, it's not going to come and replace your role anytime soon. So you will have to manually correct some things and feed it back to AI. You got to think of, you're always training it as much as it's helping you and training you. As table complexity increases, AI's performance degrades and errors. So if you try make, let's say, a big, long table like I did in the spreadsheets, it doesn't like so much complexity. It's better to just do kind of rows by rows, so not rows by rows, kind of like a smaller set of columns and then another set of columns and so forth. It seems to work better. Yeah, there's another question.
I just wanted to mention that what we've seen with AI, it's not just sort of in business analysis role that we need to make sure it gets feedback. Even if you're trying to have it do coding for you, it doesn't necessarily understand what you need. And even if you've spelled out the steps, if you say it specifically didn't do this piece that you told it to do, it says, oh, I'm sorry. And then it slightly alters the code that it gives to tell you, here's one that should work. And
yeah.
It's amusing because from an English perspective, it seems like we've already told it specifically what we wanted, and it just missed a subtlety in it. So as you said, there's nuance that it doesn't quite pick up on, even though it's described in the original requirements given. It may not feed that back to you as part of its answer because it is doing pattern recognition and not necessarily speaking the way we speak, or it is speaking the way that we speak when we're not quite attentive enough.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. Good to hear some of that feedback because it's got a way to go, but it's going to happen quickly. You know, it's going to fix itself real quick because there's enough people using it, I suppose. And then AI struggle to differentiate. So we speak about primary and secondary concepts in architecture. It's not that important, but for instance, if you're working, let's say you talk about brand identity, that might be a secondary concept to brand management. So in other words, when we do a logo, that's secondary to the brand management, concepts. And so it didn't really understand that hierarchy well enough. But yeah, that was reasonably easy to manage. So those are its negatives, I suppose. But what are the pros? So despite the challenge, I certainly cannot deny the benefits of using this. It's going to be a game changer. Well, it is a game changer. And you will save significant research time. So the effort that you have to put in the beginning to contextualize the organization and create and provide the information around the business is huge. AI is growing and learning very quickly. And so make sure that you're framing, you've got context, and you recognize that it's going to learn really quickly. And so you might be frustrated in the initial stages, but it will figure it out as you go along. But you've got to train it properly. What did they say? Junk in, junk out type of thing. A deep understanding of business architecture principles is necessary to effectively monitor and manage the process of optimal results. And then while AI like ChatGPT can be a valuable tool for business architects and business analysts, it's far from being able to replicate your role. It just doesn't have the sentience and the reasoning that a human does. So the context, it cannot understand the context, but it can speed up your job significantly. And it means spending a little bit of time understanding how AI works and teaching it, and then making sure you're using the right platforms to ensure that it's not, copyrights or anything like that. Those are particular things. So that's really it. We have got some learning bots for those who are studying for the CCBA or CBAP or whatever that are completely free that you can use that have been customized. They're on our website. So please feel free to have a look at any of those. If you did want to look at any of the business architecture course, I do have a live one coming up in November, which goes from business architecture all the way to requirements in 10 days using an actual case. So that's one of the things we're bringing in now using AI. So you can use your business case for that. But that's pretty much me. I hope that you learned a little bit more about AI and architecture. And I know it's a big mouthful. It's quite hard to pin one small bit of it. But yeah, I hope that gave you some insights and maybe some ideas of what you might do in your organization.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. Do people have any questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.
Yep.
And